Welcome to the Sober Boozers Club podcast, a place where we can talk openly and honestly about addiction, sobriety, and strangely enough, beer. I'm Ben, I'm an alcoholic, and for the last 2 years I've been sampling some of the finest alcohol-free beers the world has to offer. Each week, I'll be joined by a different guest to discuss their own lived experiences on all things related to the world of low and no alcohol beverages. So pour yourself a tipple, relax, and let me welcome you to the Sober Boozers Club. In today's episode, I'm joined by someone who, quite frankly, I can't believe has agreed to be on this podcast. He is a James Beard award-winning writer, the author of 9 beer books, a beer expert on Channel 4's Sunday Brunch, and the developer of the Mark Dredge beer flavour wheels. Did I give it away? It's Mark Dredge, and I really do think it's a significant moment when somebody such as Mark agrees to come on to a podcast related to alcohol-free beers, so it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to this episode, and I really hope you enjoy it. Mark, hello, and thank you very much for coming on to talk to me. It's possibly something that wouldn't have happened 5 or 6 years ago, is a beer expert coming on to a sobriety and beer podcast.
Yeah, I would have just said no, to be honest with you. I'd have been like, well, I think, one, I'm going to mess this up and I'm going to say things which I probably shouldn't say. And 2, I have no experience with anything alcohol free because I am 100% in on just drinking as much beer as I can. And maybe that's because the choices were terrible and there was no option. I don't think it ever crossed my mind to go into a pub or anywhere, and if I didn't want alcohol, to have an alcohol-free beer. But I think that is significantly different now. So yeah, it's a topic that I am becoming more and more passionate about, and I'm more and more excited about alcohol-free beer than I am about any other part of the beer world at the moment.
Wow, that's a bold statement, because it literally is your career.
Yeah, so maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot there, and kind of digging, pushing myself into a corner. But I think it's my career, but it's also a significant part of my life is not beer, and is all the stuff around beer. And while I might spend 8 hours a day writing about beer, thinking about beer, talking about beer, I've come to realize that the alcohol side of it is something that I don't want the effects of.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing increasingly and feeling increasingly the negatives of that. And I don't enjoy that. Whereas I have yet to find a negative with drinking 4 cans of alcohol-free beer in one night. And I'm just really excited that generally this week I've had 2 boxes of new alcohol-free beers arrive. I just looked in my fridge a second ago before we came on to talk, and I've probably got 15 different beers in there. So I was like, which one am I going to pick?
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? There's so many more kind of breweries popping up as well out of nowhere. I don't know if you've seen We Could Be Friends at all. That was just wild. That beer I didn't expect anything from, and it was amazing. And you've got breweries, obviously, Mash Gang are kind of shitting out a beer every other day, it seems. And it's outrageous the amount of beers that are being released. I'm obsessed with it.
And I love it. And I love seeing all these new ones. And being in the position that I am in, having national columns and having, a slot on TV where I get to talk about beer, it's often I get asked if people can send me beer. And I would say 90% of the time I say no, because I just don't want it, and it's going to be wasted. And I would rather not have something or spend my own money if I want it and then go and buy it, than be sent 12 cans of something and it sits in my house, doesn't get drunk, and then I end up throwing it away. I don't want to be wasteful. But I never say no to alcohol-free beer, because that will not get wasted in my house. I get through all of this and I want to try all the new ones. Like the couple of boxes I said that arrived this week was from Fierce, in Aberdeen. So obviously they know what they're doing. They brew Mash Gang's beers. So they have 3 different alcohol-free beers in there. And Williams Brothers as well. Their alcohol-free beer range. I've got Wiper and Trues as well recently.
Very nice.
Just filling up my fridge. And We Can Be Friends is really good. as well. Had that recently.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff, and I didn't think that. I mean, I've spoken to Sam about this and said when you sent me the beer, I thought it was going to be middle of the road at best, because it came from nowhere. Obviously now knowing more about Sam's story, but that's for another episode. It makes a lot more sense, but it was really exciting to get a beer sent to me that was just really, really good and I'd never heard of before. And it seems to be happening, as I say, every other week. There's a brand new beer just appearing, or a brewery that you wouldn't expect to do an alcohol-free beer suddenly do one, and it's good. It's a good time to not be drinking alcohol if you're a beer drinker.
Yeah, and I think it's a message that I'd like to get across more often. And the more times I do talks and tastings, I always talk about alcohol-free beer now. And I've genuinely seen a change in the people that I'm talking to. In that, if I'd have said this maybe 3 years ago, there would be jokes, or people would be like, I'm not drinking that, or I'd rather, you know, have a, you just hear nonsense about
Just
people talking. Exactly. Like, why would I bother drinking that? What's the point? But now I think there's been this kind of mentality shift that means that it's okay now to choose these drinks. And I think brands like Guinness Zero have done a great job with it. Beer, alcohol-free beer being on draft has done a great job with it.
Massively.
Particularly, and this is something that I've got from Jordan at Mash Gang. But he's talking about like alibi brands, but then also more than that. Actually, alibi brands is probably the wrong way of talking about it, because he means that in a different way. It's more about anonymity.
Okay.
So that, we could both sit there with a beer. Let's say it's Guinness Zero, just that's the one that came to my head. It looks just like Guinness. Yes. It could come in a Guinness glass. No one needs to know. We've both got the same beer. No one needs to know that we're on the zeros. Everyone else is on the regular stuff.
Yeah.
If we wanted to, and that's significant, I think. But if we wanted to say, "Hey, I'm drinking Guinness Zero," then Guinness or whatever alcohol-free brand are like, "Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for supporting what we're doing." Mm-hmm. But equally, you can have that anonymity if you want it. And that's one thing that I think Mash Gang do so well, is that they celebrate that anonymity, and they're like, if however you want to talk or think about this beer, that's for you to decide, and that's your approach. And that is, we're not going to say, we're not going to shame you in any way for the way that you want to behave around this beer.
Yeah, massively, because it does make a massive difference. As someone myself who is sober because I have to be sober, going and ordering an Anxiety Saint, or going and ordering a Stoop, or going and ordering a Crystal Ammunition feels a lot nicer than going to a bar and saying, "Do you have any alcohol-free options, and what are they?" Because that's just immediately, that puts me off. Especially in the early days of sobriety, it was a real trigger for me going to a bar and asking to it was like going to see like the naughty selection of drinks. Well, that's how it felt in my brain, and it was very clinical, and it just didn't interest me. It didn't give me the pub experience. Whereas all of these beers that exist now, with like the branding, and like you say, it looks the same. A lot of it tastes very, very similar, if not the same.
Yeah, and it means we can fit in, doesn't it? It means that whatever we're drinking, and we can choose how we approach it, but whatever we're drinking, it means that we're still part of that round. We're still part of that conversation. We're still part of that pub experience.
Yeah.
Say there's 5 of us in a pub. I don't want alcohol, but everyone else is having pints. If I have a Diet Coke, it's very obvious that I'm not drinking. Mm-hmm. Okay, I stand out because I'm not having a beer. Whereas if I've got a glass of a pint of alcohol-free whatever, I look the same. I still fit in that situation. No one needs to know that I'm not drinking alcohol apart from me. And that is important. And, I choose to drink less alcohol. So for me, that's just a personal preference. But I still don't want to feel like I'm somehow being shamed if I'm not doing that. I don't want to be left out because of that, So that involvement, that's, I think that for me is the significance, maybe the singular significance of beer is how it brings people together. And it does it in a way that no other drink does anywhere in the world. It's a really different experience to get together and just share pints. It's very different to doing it over tea or over coffee or over champagne. They all have this different social connotations and social connections. It doesn't need to be because of the alcohol, does it? It's that the way that it feels, that habitual nature of being able to share something and being able to talk and relax around this kind of almost arbitrary object that's a pint in size, and we know how it looks, we know how it feels, and it kind of refreshes us in different ways.
Yeah, it's the ritual of it, isn't it? It's the whole. Well, it's a big part of our culture. So, in terms of beer, what started it for you? What was your journey into the world of beer?
So I, um, it's an interesting one because it's not necessarily. Well, no, I guess it's interesting because it's embarrassing. And
Okay. Well, now I'm extra interested then.
So I didn't really drink beer. I didn't really like beer. I remember, but at the same time, when I was say 18, I
Yeah.
was the kid that wanted to be different. So I had lots of piercings. I wanted to get tattoos. I had all sorts of crazy haircuts and styles. So I didn't want to drink what everyone else was drinking. So I remember specifically one day going to just like a social club for my mate's dad's work and ordered a pint of Ruddles, a pint of ale of the hand pump.
Okay.
And it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever tasted. It was this. It was completely sour. It was just vinegar, like horrendous. So I didn't really persevere with that. We used to go then drinking in this rock club near where I grew up, and it was called the Tap and Tin. And one day we saw this really hot girl who had a belt, and her belt was just covered in Nuki Brown bottle caps.
Right.
So from then on, my mate and I only drank Nuki Brown for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And that was, I liked that. That was fun. But I didn't go to university as a beer drinker. I went to university as a Malibu and Coke drinker. So
Right.
I was at university drinking Malibus and Cokes, and the guy in the room next to me liked beer. And I think when there's one in your group who has a particular interest in beer, they're more likely to guide you to pubs which have better beer.
Yeah.
And this was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So this was not like we did not have the selection of beers that we have now.
Before the real craft revolution kind of kicked off.
Exactly, very much so. And we had some local cask ales where I went to university, but there was no real choice. I was in sort of outside. I was kind of near Windsor, the university I went to. That's called Royal Holloway. But we could travel into London, and if we travelled into London at that point, there were basically two places we could go for craft beer. So we would go to that. One was the Rake, which is still there, and one was the White Horse in Parsons Green, which is a fairly famous pub was for its beer. So because my mate guided us to these pubs and around, I wouldn't go there and then order a Malibu and Coke. I would go there and suffer through pints of pale ales and IPAs and things. And I realized I had a sweeter palate for beer, which is unusual because I don't really have a sweet palate for anything else. But I would like dark milds. I would like sweeter stouts. And it just evolved from there. I think just by drinking so frequently, but almost always in a tasting capacity. Like, sure, we always drank too much, but we drank too much by drinking mouthfuls of every beer that we could possibly.
Yeah.
Good.
I've fallen guilty of that in Amsterdam a few times. What's the name? Cafe Golem. Amsterdam. Yeah. Good stuff.
So yeah, just drinking, just the curiosity of drinking everything I possibly could. The jump, I suppose, to how it became a career is that I thought I might like to be a writer. Thought I might try writing. And by the time I was at that point of making that decision, I didn't really know much about anything or which direction or which things I might want to write about. But I knew that I quite liked the taste of beer. So I just decided to start writing things about that. And yeah, it just progressed out of that kind of love of flavor. So for me, it was an interest in flavor that first got me in, that first sort of hooked me into the wanting to try different things. And then the more I tried and the more it became part of my career or my I suppose my life first before career, the more I started to travel and the more I started to feel more of that social importance.
Yeah.
There's a universality to having a beer,
Yes, massively.
but the context of it changes. And, wherever you are in the world, you could have the same conversations over a beer, be in completely different languages and things and different contexts, but there's a universality to it. But there's also a uniqueness wherever you go. So if you're drinking in Bavaria, the drinking experience there is going to be different to Brussels, or at least the flavor experience. And the way that you approach it, and the look and the smell and the feel of the bars, and the way that you're served, and the way that the glasses arrive, and the way that they're kind of cleared and you pay. And I loved all these intricacies of service and of experience and of just trying local beers where they're from. Well, I mean, yeah, having those local experiences.
Yeah, massively. Like going back to the culture kind of thing, you take in the culture of whatever location you're at based on their drinking habits. And I think it is interesting. Like, I used to go to Greece a lot, and I wouldn't drink fix in this country because it doesn't taste very good in this country.
Yeah.
But in Greece, it's just like this is amazing. This hits the spot.
And I love that. I love that it doesn't necessarily matter the perceived quality of the beer. What matters is where you are and when.
Yes.
It's
Suppose you can take that with alcohol-free beer, because if you're not judging a beer based on it's based on the environment around you, not necessarily the involvement of alcohol.
No, I know exactly what you mean though. And I was in Seville in January, and Spain is amazing for alcohol-free beer.
Okay.
The varieties that they have are great, but actually the availability of it is amazing. And
Okay. That's good to know.
So, and Seville was brilliant for it. I would often go into a bar, and but actually before I realized what it was, I would walk past and I'd be like, oh, they've got 3 taps from I can't remember which brewery it was. Anyway, they got 3 taps from this brewery. And I've not had that one over there, which is called Sin, S-I-N. I want to have that one. So the next time I went into a bar that had it, I ordered that, and I was like, oh, it's the alcohol free. I don't speak Spanish. I think that's probably obvious. Otherwise, I would have known what that meant. But then there were other bars that had 2 alcohol-free beers on tap, and they only really had 4 taps anyway. And they've got an amber one, or like a toasted one. So they had this toasted lager, and they had the regular lager, but it was everywhere. And I drank so much alcohol-free beer while I was there. And actually, I haven't wanted to drink that much beer this year because I'm training for a marathon.
Yes.
Doing lots of different work. I just been wary of my alcohol intake. And my girlfriend booked me this trip as a surprise. And I was like, amazing. And the first thing I did, which is complete habit, she told me, I think she hadn't even finished telling me where we were going, and I was already Googling craft beer bars Seville. Just because that's like the first thing I would ever do, going somewhere. And then I was like, oh, man, do I want to drink? I started having these almost like anxious thoughts about, do I actually want to go and drink like I perhaps would have done a few years ago, in which case I would have, been having beers throughout the day, and I would have been chasing to go to this bar and that bar to try and find this brewery and have that, and then have the local lager here and trying to find the coldest beer I possibly could over there. And I realized actually that thought worried me a little bit. I had this slight anxiety about that experience. So then when I got there and realized how much alcohol-free beer that was, I discovered that I could have the exact same experiences that I had been so familiar with. Just the beer in my glass didn't have the alcohol in it. Yeah. And I was really comforted by that, because it didn't then feel like this holiday had changed. It was this weekend away is the same as it, maybe always was. I'm just going to remember more of it, and I'm going to get a bit more out of this actual experience.
You can see, I think, how the industry that you're in can be quite dangerous for some people, potentially, with, like you say, you're feeling like maybe it's getting, I don't really want to drink this much, but it's what you do. So I think it's nice that there's the option to continue to work, but without having to consume alcohol.
Yeah, and that's, that's important, for me, especially. And I realized that I mean, yes, some of my work is describing flavor and talking specifically about literally having to drink something and describe it.
Hmm.
And I'm aware that that's part of what my job is. That's just, yeah, just what I do.
Yeah, that's the nature of. Not everyone that drinks beer is an alcoholic. That's something that I remind a lot of alcoholics. It's
Exactly. And I'm lucky that I've never needed alcohol. I've
yeah,
always
yeah, yeah.
known when I need time off, and I'm always very good at saying no.
Hmm.
There have been lots of periods in my life when I have drunk excessively for long periods of time, maybe under the veil of research for books or whatever it may be.
Yeah, yeah.
But I always know that my body basically rejects it at some point. I
Hmm.
get to a point where my body is just like, nope, absolutely not, no more. We're not
Yep.
doing this, and for another day. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of always aware of. Um, I've always been good at stopping. But with my work, I've found in recent years that I've just wanted to write more stories about the people,
Yeah.
and much more of my work, aside from sort of having this tasting wheel business, which is helping people ultimately communicate about beer, not necessarily guzzle down loads of it.
Hmm.
The stuff that I'm most interested in is the people. It's sort of what we do and why it can have significance beyond maybe just the drunk experience, let's say.
Yes. Yeah, I was talking to someone very recently about something quite similar to that, really, and they said something that really has stuck with me, and that was that you should enjoy your alcohol more, but enjoy less alcohol. And that made me think about kind of my levels of alcohol consumption and how I was enjoying my alcohol to begin with, and then I was enjoying the volume of alcohol rather than the experience. I think it's preaching moderation to an alcoholic, which is really difficult for me to grasp, because for
Mm.
me I could never have, 1 pint. It was always, there's no point in having 1 pint. But with alcohol free, I can have 1 pint and go, oh, that was really tasty, but I don't need any more liquid.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That what do you think made that shift happen in that you couldn't have had 1 pint of alcohol, but then you can have 1 pint of alcohol free? Is it the ethanol? Is it purely that reaction,
Yeah,
that feeling?
I don't think I necessarily liked beer that much. I think I just liked being drunk.
Mm.
Whereas now I'm learning what beers I like. I'm learning so much about my palate. And I'm by no means an expert, nor would I ever claim to be. But I'm learning more about the industry and about the different types of beers that are available. And it's kind of okay. I like beer now. And when you like something, you don't need to have it all the time. It's a treat, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's important to see it that way. I guess the wonderful thing about alcohol-free beer is you could open one at breakfast, and then you
Yeah,
could then have one at 11 a.m. and you could have one with lunch, and then you could have one in the afternoon, and you could drink 10 a day.
yeah,
But then I think quite quickly for me it would lose its excitement, it would lose its appeal, because
yeah.
I like to save it up for the moments when I know that I really want it, or I feel like I've not deserved it. I don't want it to be kind of related to that, but I get to the point where I finish dinner, I've
Hmm.
done the washing up, and now I'm going to sit down and it's sort of time to chill out. And then beer becomes a ritual and a cue in that situation. You said the word ritual earlier. I think ritual is the most kind of relevant word for a lot of people who maybe rely on beer, or just so familiar with having beer.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
because
just familiar.
it can be a healthy companion. Like I think beer is a wonderful thing. Um, and it's a controversial opinion for me to take, really, because I'm supposed to be all pitchforks about it. But I think all forms of beer are great. I think what isn't great is maybe big alcohol's reaction to the rise in alcoholism, and the way that they deal with that. But again, that's a completely different conversation. But I think it is ritualistic, and I think it's a healthy ritual as long as it is healthy. And you know, for when it gets unhealthy, that's when alcohol-free beer is so wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued by that almost like switch in you, that change that then kind of
Mhm.
almost means that you are allowed this, or it means you can feel comfortable having these alcohol-free beers, whereas you couldn't with alcohol. Is that did that sort of come naturally, or did you almost have to force the alcohol free to become a habit? Like I'm trying to understand kind of
It
that
was
shift.
really strange for me. So I knew that I had to stop drinking for, gosh, about 12 months, realistically. And I was trying to moderate, and alcohol-free beer to me, when I was trying to moderate, tasted awful. And I can remember having a Lucky Saint and thinking, "Oh, this is terrible," um, and I just couldn't get on with it. Free Dam, I thought was horrible. I ended up pouring it down the sink. And then the last night of my drinking was just so dramatic, and all of my social group happened to be there, and I saw everything that happened, and it was now or never. It was kind of a, if I don't stop drinking now, then I'm going to lose everything in the next year. So literally the next day, it was like, okay, alcohol-free beers, I'm going to get on it. And Lucky Saint, I don't know, it was kind of, I was clueless. I felt like Lucky Saint was making me not have withdrawal symptoms because of the point 0.5, which I now know is absolute nonsense. But at the time, it was like, there's a little bit of alcohol in there, so it's going to stop my shakes and my withdrawals and all of this. And really, I wasn't having withdrawals, and it wasn't, it wasn't as dramatic as I thought it was in my head. Um, but then it just became a part of kind of what I did. Like, it would get to 5 o'clock and I'd have a craving for sugar, essentially, because that sticks around for quite a while. Alcohol-free beer. Yep, cool, feel good. So it did make me feel good, just without the kind of intoxication. And now it's at a point where if I've got a social evening or if I'm seeing friends, I'll buy maybe 2 4-packs from a supermarket, and I often find I only get through about 3 of them. And I've gone and bought 12. So it's kind of, that habit hasn't gone away. The kind of, no, I need like 26 beers for an evening. Like, no, I drink 3 of them now, but then I end up stockpiling because I'm so prepared for drinking loads of liquid.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's also, it's almost like you almost continued that drinking habit, but the drink in your hand just changed, and
Yeah.
then that became, you managed to make that become the new habit, that healthier, better choice.
Yeah, it was literally taking one thing that had alcohol in it, replacing it with another thing that tastes the same, looks the same, smells the same, just doesn't have alcohol in it. And I think the kind of the online community was massive for me as well, because I made the decision to set up an Instagram page and start talking about beer, and then finding other people that were talking about alcohol-free beer was massive for me.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that we can now have these conversations, like the kind of how we kind of started talking earlier. It's, we weren't having these chats, we weren't having these drinks weren't available 5 years ago.
Yes.
It just wasn't really an option. They were there, but they were very much on the peripheral, and they were outside of normal drinking. They were kind of like last. They were like, well, we have to put one alcohol-free beer in the fridge. Let's just put in Bex Blue or
Bex Blue,
whatever
and
it
then
is.
Heineken came around, and it was just, yeah.
And now I get surprised by how many alcohol-free beers I see in fridges, or how there's an entire fridge dedicated to decent alcohol-free drinks.
Yeah, even in the last 6 months, it seems to have gone massive. Like more than I remember in recent times, especially with kegs. I'm seeing so much on tap, and beforehand it had been kind of a struggle to find anything.
And the draft stuff, that's the stuff I really want.
Yeah.
And because I want pints. If I'm in the pub, I'm there to have a pint specifically.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want. And for me, what I find most often is if I'm out drinking with mates, I will alternate now, or I will, if there's alcohol free on draft, I'll have that. If we go somewhere else and there's a beer that I want to drink, I'll have a pint of that. If in the next place they've got alcohol free, I'll go back to that. So I find myself now actually like kind of flipping quite naturally between the two. So it's quite often I'll go out and mates will have 4 pints, and maybe I'll have had 2 that are beer and 2 which are 2 which are alcoholic and 2 which are non-alcoholic. And that feels like a good balance for me. I feel like that works for me. And I don't feel like it's detrimental to my career in any way, because the beers that I would have drink anyway I'm not new beers. I'm not in the pub trying to find the next great IPA or anything. I'm there drinking classic bitters. I'm there drinking pints of Guinness. I'm there drinking kind of the beers that I know and love, because I don't want to spend £6 on a shit pint. I want
Yeah.
very good pints that are reliable.
That's
So
it,
I'm
isn't it? Like we just, and that's the same for for non-alcohol drinkers when we go to the pub. It's like I don't I don't want a million different options. I'm not asking for, for you to change your entire system. Just give me a decent lager, a decent pale, and if you're feeling generous, like a stout or a sour or something, or a wheat beer, just two options that aren't Lucky Saint because it's great, but I'm bored of it. Or Heineken, Beck's, all of that because it just doesn't cut it anymore. Do,
exactly.
do you
And
think that that is the future of the kind of alcohol-free movement within beer, getting kegs to more places?
yeah, I think it has to be. I think the only way that the category grows is if it gets in front of more people in a format that they want to drink. So you might have the greatest selection of alcohol-free beer in the world, but if it's all in bottles in the fridge and you're in a pub, then you have to make a much greater. I don't know. It feels like it's more effort to order that bottle or that can out of the fridge. And like you mentioned earlier, you having to ask specifically for what do you have
Yeah.
that's this is a much bigger step than saying, can I have the pale ale?
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It's like it shouldn't feel like much, and it's
You
not
feel like an
really significant.
inconvenience, don't you? You feel like you're inconveniencing someone, and then also everyone around you that you've then said, "Oh, can I see what the alcohol-free options are?" They're annoyed that it's taking longer, and
Mm,
then you get more kind of paranoid that people are thinking, "Well, why aren't you drinking?" And then it just becomes an issue when it really doesn't have to be.
yeah, and you become very aware that then you've ordered something, off menu or such, or like just a bit different. So yeah, no, I think the category grows when it's in pubs and available on pints. I went to a gig at the weekend, and I was like, well, I had a couple of beers before I went. I
Hmm.
just fancied a couple of beers. It was Sunday. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have some beers. Went to the gig. I was like, I don't want more alcohol, but I do want something in my hand.
Yes.
And they had alcohol free on draft, and they actually had
Oh,
quite a
nice.
decent selection. The alcohol free on draft was, I think it was San Miguel.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't have cared what alcohol free beer it was on draft. I was
Yeah.
just happy to have that as a pint, and I was really surprised at how many people were ordering it. So I was just at the bar for 10 minutes or so, and they had maybe 10 taps. But I saw as many alcohol-free pints poured as any other brand.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really kind of telling. I mean, it was Sunday night at kind of an aging punk pop band's gig
Yeah.
where, everyone's, thinning hair and fading tattoos and, all of that. We're not 20 years old anymore.
Yeah, I'm starting to
But
fit into that category. So,
and I was very they were very much my people. I very much fit into
yeah.
that category. Um and yeah, but it's interesting that it was available there, and then that made my experience of the gig better, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah, I think it is. It's just a no-brainer, isn't it? Because as well, the kind of myth that non-drinkers don't spend money in hospitality. It's just, well, we're not going to because there's nothing to spend money on at the moment.
Exactly, it's that chicken and egg issue, and
Yeah.
and I think there's a really interesting argument that alcohol-free beer can save pubs. By having more choice, it makes the pub somewhere that we could spend more time or spend hours of our day in which the pub doesn't feel like it's an option.
Hmm.
By having better alcohol-free choices, maybe it means we're more likely to go there, let's say, and use it instead of a coffee shop. If I can
Yes.
go to a pub and I know that I can have maybe a sandwich for a fiver and I can drink a couple of pints of alcohol-free beer, I would much rather sit there and work in the afternoon than
Hmm.
sit in a coffee shop and have two flat whites and a, a ciabatta.
Yes.
I would feel more comfortable in the pub. I will probably get more work done. I'm going to spend 20 quid in that pub. If plenty of other people do that, plenty of other people feel comfortable doing that, then that has to be a good thing. Pubs
Yeah,
have
that's
to
it.
be making more money through the day. And maybe alcohol-free beer, and having that accessibility of it is one way to kind of help get people back into pubs.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about the kind of the lunchtime punters. What breweries started you on the whole alcohol-free movement? When did your eyes start to open a little bit, or when did you think, okay, this isn't terrible?
That's a good question. I feel like my answer is just going to be swayed by what I'm drinking more of now.
Yeah.
Um,
Because for me, it was 2 years ago. The first three that I discovered were obviously Mash Gang, Low Tide, and now Below Brew Co., and Sheep and Wolf's Clothing. They were the first three that kind of cropped up when I Googled alcohol-free craft beer.
yeah,
And now there's just so many that we're kind of spoiled.
yeah, absolutely. I definitely remember having my first Mash Gang beers and thinking, oh, but this is different. No, like this is changed things. This is leveled up, or this is going to make everyone else level up because this stuff is really good and it's exciting. This is not just here's our normal beer, but we took the alcohol out. You're welcome. It's This is cool. I definitely remember Lucky Saint early on and drinking lots of Lucky Saint and loving that, and that having that as kind of this go-to alternative that I would drink lots of. I'm trying to even think at what sort of point in my life that became more of a shift that I was aware of. It would have been a couple of years ago.
It feels like it feels like that's when it started to really like roll. A couple of years ago, everyone that I've spoken to has said, in the last couple of years, it's really gone. Okay, it's picking up traction, and there's more beers coming out, and the kind of technology behind it has got better. So it's interesting, and also quite nice for me because it's literally when I stopped drinking. So I think if I'd have tried it 5 years prior, I'd have been really fucked.
Yeah, it was definitely good time in that respect. And then there was just this, snowballing that meant there was more and more coming. And now there's this sort of great wave of alcohol-free beers coming through. So many more brewers are trying it. I think, again, we talk about Mash Gang, but I think they're so central to the story of the development of alcohol-free and the growth of alcohol-free beer. I really don't think you could understate it, because the fact that they've done 40 plus collaborations means they've gone into 40 breweries who didn't make alcohol-free beer, and they taught them how to make it. They made this style of, let's say, category of beer which seemed almost impossible to make. They made it very easy to make, very possible to make. And it's encouraged other people to do it. And it meant that, when I'm going into craft beer bars and I'm seeing, oh, hey, there's, that brewery that I really like, and they've got a new beer out. Oh, and it's 0.5. Okay, well, I'll just grab that as well as these 6 IPAs that I'm buying.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, this is good. So it just made it this more of an option, but then the variety that came with it felt really important and felt significant. And like Low Tide, I remember buying cases from Low Tide. They're is it Below Brew Co?
Below Brew Co. now as of this week.
So, yeah. So I remember getting them, and cases from other places, and just not being disappointed.
Yes, I think that's the big thing, isn't it? As soon like starting to have beers that you go, oh, this is really good. This is the kind of point that I try to make to so many people that it feels like I'm banging my head against a wall sometimes. It's like the liquid is the same. Like it's a beer. It's a beer. I don't understand how it's that hard to comprehend, because it is. It's just a beer. There's just no alcohol.
It's something I've really struggled to kind of get my thoughts around it and describe it, but I feel like we just need a better way of describing it than alcohol-free or non-alcoholic, because it is just beer. And when you say, and I'm guilty, I've probably said it several times in the last half hour, but if I say, oh, this is the real beer and this is the alcohol-free beer, it's like, well, no,
like full fat beer or proper beer, or like it's difficult, isn't it?
But, I know, and I say it all the time, and and I'm not being. I'm not like trying to take the piss out of it. It's just that's just what comes out, because that's just hey, I need to differentiate these two somehow.
Yeah.
But at the same time, why do I need to differentiate them somehow? It's just it's all beer, just, you know, one is 0.5%, one is 5.0, one is 8.5%. Like that percentage shouldn't make a difference. It's still just the same drink, and it's made just the same way.
I think it will get there. I think because I'm guilty of it as well. I call it proper beer or real beer, or I had someone once try and call alcohol-free wine fake wine, and it was like, well, okay, fine. But from what I mean, yourself on Sunday Brunch, literally, I can remember the first time I saw you on there with alcohol-free beer, and I was like, what? Like, I felt so validated sat at home watching a program that was, we talk about rituals. I'd watch Sunday Brunch when I was hanging out of my arse. And sometimes I'd have to turn it off because the thought of food was just too much. And here I was watching you talk about alcohol-free beer. And I teared up a little bit talking to my girlfriend about it because it was this is just so normal, and I don't have to feel weird for enjoying this kind of little liquid that's here, and it's kind of like for people that can't drink proper alcohol, or because that's very much how I felt at the time. And seeing the change in people's opinions on it, and talking to people within the real beer industry and the real beer world, it's just been lovely because people seem to really be open to it now.
And it comes from the quality, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like there could be 100 alcohol-free beers on the market and available, but if they all taste like garbage, then it's irrelevant because they're crap. It's but the fact that they taste good and people can have them and be like, yeah, it's delicious. I'm gonna have another one because I love it. It just means that this is viable, and it means that it's going to continue. And I think we still have this acceptance issue. This idea that it is different, that it's not real, it's not real drinking, it's not real beer. It's this almost like this machismo idea of, oh, hey, I'm going out for beer. I need to drink pints of it. I need to drink pints of alcohol. That is, is going to remain, but we're in a big generational shift, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the beer industry reacts to it, because in 10 years' time, the industry is going to be significantly different to what it is now. 10 years ago, it was very different to what it is now.
Yeah.
So the next leap forward is going to be really significant. And there are going to be so many more non-drinking, non-alcohol consuming, let's say 20-year-olds at that point, and so many fewer alcohol drinking 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. So there's going to be this shift, and the beer industry, alcohol industry, if it wants to remain something viable that people spend their money on so that they have nice experiences, nice flavor experiences, they have to be making things that people are going to want to have in their house and they're going to want to go out for and spend money on, which are, alcohol alternatives, alcohol adjacents, some things that remain relevant in people's lives from these bigger brands or smaller brands. Beer or alcohol has to remain relevant because socially it's very important.
Yes.
So it's how do we make these products which can remain in people's hands while they have conversations, when they go out with friends, when they're at dinner, when they're relaxing, when they're on dates, all of that stuff.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's inclusivity. And I think that's all anybody wants. I want to be able to go out with my friends and for them to have whatever drinks they want, and for me to have whatever drink I want, and for us all to be enjoying those drinks together like adults. And that's all I want. And I think that's all that anyone can really ask for. And I think I'd like to see the big companies put a little bit more time into the quality of their liquids. But at the same time, I kind of wouldn't, because I want my independence to do well. So it's a difficult balance, I suppose. But as long as good liquid continues to be made, I'm a happy boy.
Yeah, same, exactly. I want the choices still to be there. And I think the reality is it's going to be led by the bigger breweries because they're the ones who have so many taps. They have so much like real estate in pubs that it's potentially much easier for them to say, hey, you don't need 3 lines of Heineken, turn one of them into 0,
Yeah.
or if it's a Carlsberg pub, like the gig I was at, there was Carlsberg brands, have San Miguel 0. You don't need that other whatever brand. And I think they're perhaps the first steps in, just because of scale and accessibility and budgets and all of that. But no, I'm genuinely excited. It's the, like I said at the beginning, it's one of the things in beer which makes me most excited at the moment, is seeing this development, being able to try all these different beers and seeing more people realize that this can be relevant to them.
Yes. And I think that is a massive point. And to say it's one of the things that you're the most excited by, that's a huge statement, really. When, like you say, it's kind of what you have done for a very long time, is talk about beer, and to talk about alcohol-free beer in the same light as full alcohol beer. It's a big deal, really.
Mm. And beer is just an important part of lots of different social cultures. So I want it to remain within that. And I love it. Like we talk about traveling in Spain. When you travel in Germany, the choices there are great. You can always get good alcohol-free beer. And I'm really intrigued. I'm going to the US in a few weeks, and every time I've been recently, it's because I want to drink as much good beer as possible.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I say that one of the last times I went, I was intentionally sort of avoided going out just because I didn't want to get drunk on 7% IPAs. So I had this, I guess maybe I was already in this like state of thinking like, oh God, I'm going to get absolutely wasted. But this time I'm going, I'm really intrigued to see what the alcohol-free range is like, because I still believe that the US market is behind, certainly in terms of its maybe availability in places. And I might be wrong. I'd be very happy to be proved wrong in that.
I've heard 2 completely contradictory points in the last couple of weeks. One person has said that there's some amazing stuff, but it just doesn't get talked about over here. And then literally earlier today, I had someone say, yeah, it's terrible. So I'd be very intrigued as well to see what you make of it.
Yeah. And it's in New England, so it's a really good beer area, but it's quite near kind of Athletic Brewing's sort of
right, yeah,
East Coast area. So I expect they'll be the ones that I see more than anyone else. So yeah, I'm definitely intrigued as to what I'll see there, because otherwise I'm just going to be drinking pints of 7% IPA, and my body is not used to that. So
no, I don't know how. I've always, well, not always, but I've wondered recently how I'd handle a pint. Like I went through a really dangerous phase of being really into like 11% stouts and all of that, and that was when I'd always have like 2 nice pints, because it was like, oh no, I like beer. And then after those 2 nice pints, I'd have like a shitload of cheap lager because I liked alcohol. But yeah, one of like a 7%. It scares me now. The thought of it. Even some like functional drinks that have like nootropics in and all of that, I get really anxious before I drink them.
Oh, really?
Like some of the mushroom drinks and Imposter Brew and stuff. The first time I had Imposter Brew, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know how it's going to make me feel. It's fucking ridiculous.
How did it make you feel?
Relaxed, but also on edge. So it was just, I don't know, some of the stories and some of the things that I used to put into myself. And now I'm sat here reading the ingredients list with a load of like natural herbs and things and getting stressed about it. It's just, it's outrageous.
Do you like CBD beer? Have you had any?
I haven't had any yet, but I would be very interested. And I keep meaning to order it. And then something else comes out and I go, oh no, I want to get that. So it's on my list, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, so the beer I would say I've drunk most in the last, let's say, 6 months is Brewlow. Brewlow's CBD. I think it's just called CBD IPA.
Okay. I've had some Brewlow before, but not the CBD one.
Yeah, so I got some of their beers and the CBD IPA was in there.
Yeah.
And it's quite high, so it's 35 milligrams per 330 ml. So it's a pretty high, relatively pretty high amount of it. But I don't know whether it psychologically it just makes me feel better because I think there's this kind of impactful CBD in there, or whether it's actually having a difference. But I've bought a couple of cases of that beer. Okay. And for me, the case of beer is kind of a big deal. I get so much beer. I've got so much beer in the house. I don't want it. It's very infrequent that I would spend my own money on 24 cans or bottles of the same beer.
Yes.
But that is one that I do, and I will, because I just really like it. It also helps that it's kind of really bitter and really like dank. I think the CBD in it just adds this great hop flavor.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's a category. I'm kind of getting a bit more intrigued by these nootropics and mushrooms and things.
Yeah, all the functional drinks.
Yeah, and I don't think you can get enough dosage in most functional drinks that they're actually providing a physiological function.
Yes,
but I do think psychologically they can have an impact. Although I think 35 milligrams of CBD is probably enough that would have an actual impact. But I think any of these mushroom beers, like I take some mushroom supplements because I think they're good for sort of fitness and some of the other goals that I have. I think they work for that. But I can't imagine the amount of mushrooms that would have to go into a beer for it to be...
Yeah, you'd have to drink so much of the stuff.
Exactly. It'd be like chewing through bits at the end. And I think I'm happy. Like I like beer, but I don't necessarily need all of my vitamins and nutrients to come in beer form.
I think when it gets to that point, that's when it's like, okay, we need to address this kind of beer issue. Like that's when it becomes a ritual, when it goes from a ritual to being something a lot more sinister, I think.
It's like protein beer, like beer that's got 10 grams of protein in it.
I've seen some of those and I just don't understand. I don't understand the protein seems to be everywhere at the moment. I mean, protein has always been everywhere, but protein in advertising seems to be everywhere at the moment.
Yeah, and even in beer, a liquid that has no right really having protein in. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm someone that exercises a lot. I'm always thirsty. Like if I can drink 10 grams of refreshing protein, like I just think, well, I should. Yeah. Because then I'm combining my drinks and getting a nutritional benefit from it. But
it's strange, isn't it? But I wonder, for people that originally made beer, if they could see what was going on now, I wonder if they'd be over the moon or absolutely fucking livid.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Like, just imagine like some kind of caveman, like 10,000 years ago. Yeah. I wonder what they'd be more and more kind of freaked out by, like aeroplanes or mobile phones, or just like
what's happened to beer?
Hazy IPA. What the fuck have you done?
Fruited sours, absolutely fucking livid.
Yeah, you idiots. All of this technology, all of this great stuff you've achieved, and look what you've done.
Look what you've done to our beer. Mark, thank you so much for coming and talking to me. I was really keen to get you on because I think what you've done for the alcohol-free industry is massive, really. Like going and talking about it to a national audience is just, it's great. I love to see it, and thank you for everything that you do. Oh,
of course. I mean, if they let me talk about it on TV every week, I'd go on there every week talking about alcohol-free beer, but they don't, unfortunately. So I do my best. I do my best whenever I can.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Sober Boozers Club podcast. My name is Ben Gibbs. You can find me at Sober Boozers Club. For all things Mark Dredge, there's a number of ways that you can get involved. You can either head to his website, which is beerdredge.com. You can have a look at goodbeerhunting.com and read yourself some articles. Or you can watch Sunday Brunch on Channel 4 on Sundays, and hopefully he'll be on. Thank you again for listening. My name is Ben Gibbs. You can find me at Sober Boozers Club. For now, you take care, and I'll catch you again very soon.